Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Miles, I use they them pronouns, and I like to talk about books. If you are returning, thank you so much for coming back, I really appreciate you. So today I am going to be talking about all the books I read in May. I think it's like 24 books or something. You'll see in my nice little clickbait title. So yeah, it's gonna be a longer video, but I'm also trying to get through it kind of quickly because it is already the 14th and I am trying to get this video out soon so I can put out more content for this month. So my more forgettable books of this month, like my 3 stars and stuff, might be glossed over a little bit. So I'm sorry about that in advance, but I hope you enjoy. Get yourself a cup of coffee or something, or tea, or whatever you like to drink. Grab a snack, sit back, and talk about these books with me. Let's just get right into it. First, I read An Elderly Lady is Up to No Good by Helen Thurston, and I loved this book. It was so great. It was like a nice, cozy little book, but also about an old woman murdering people. It follows this woman named Maud who lives in this big apartment all alone that was left to her when her father died, and she like doesn't even have to pay rent. It's a really sweet setup. And this beginning of this book follows when a woman is kind of trying to trick her out of this apartment, and Maud will do anything to protect her home and the place she loves, and maybe even murder. So this book was really fun. It was very lighthearted and silly, and I just had a really good time reading it. It is translated from Swedish, and I've read a few other books that were Swedish as well, and I really enjoyed them. I just like the writing style, but this was just such a fun, lighthearted book about an old woman that kills people. Like, what more could you want? It definitely wasn't perfect. It isn't leaving me with like a life-altering perspective or anything, so I did give it a 4 out of 5 because I just had such a good time reading it. It was a nice short little read. I would definitely recommend it. It was just nice and cozy. So yeah, that book was great. Okay, next I read After the People Lights Have Gone Off by Stephen Graham Jones, and this is definitely one of the more forgettable reads of the month. I gave it a 3-star because, you know, with short story collections, it's kind of difficult. Like, some of the stories are 4-star, some are 2-star, so I usually end up giving a lot of story collections just a 3 because it's kind of like the mean of how I felt about all of the stories. And this one kind of just honestly was kind of forgettable to me. I love Stephen Graham Jones. He's one of my favorite authors, but I can't really tell you any of these stories, like anything that happened in these stories. I did like, though, there were some hints of his other books in this story collection. I really like when you can see that from an author, where like the genesis of their books came from. You can see hints of Mongrels and what's it called? Night of the Mannequins in these stories, so that was kind of fun. You know, it wasn't terrible by any means, but it just wasn't like a crazy short story collection. It wasn't my favorite thing by Stephen Graham Jones I've read, for sure. It's one of, I think it's the only book I've read by him that I've given a 3-star. So, whatever. Not the best thing in the world. Would not really recommend it. If you're interested in Stephen Graham Jones, go check out like any of his other books. Okay, next, I am a Batman girly now. We all know this. So there's gonna be a decent amount of Batman in this wrap-up. I read Batman Earth 1, volumes 1 through 3, the whole collection by Jeff Johns. And I loved this series. Like, out of all of the Batman content I've read so far, including the ones from June, all of my recent reads, Batman Earth 1 is my favorite. It is the most similar to the new 2022 movie. So this came out only a few years ago and kind of starts over from the very beginning, and rewrites a Batman origin story. Rewrites Year One, the classic Frank Miller book, and I love this. I love the way it handles this. It's definitely like the most realistic telling of Gotham and of Batman. Something I really liked about this, and I also really liked about the 2022 movie, is that it just highlights like the absurdity of Batman and how fucking weird he is and how weird he looks. In the beginning, you know, it's showing him in his first year of being Batman, and he fucks up all the time. He's so bad at his job. Everyone's always making fun of how stupid his costume looks. I love that shit. It's so funny. So that was kind of volume 1, was getting just warmed up to Batman, getting his origin story. And then in the second volume, the Riddler gets introduced, which was really exciting for me because I loved the Riddler in the 2022 release. So that was really fun. Definitely not the same as the 2022 movie, but once again, kind of the closest interpretation related to that. So I did have a lot of fun with that. And the third volume definitely like tapered off a little. A lot of people kind of agreed with me. I was looking at Goodreads that it just wasn't the same quality as the first two, which is kind of a bummer. It just got really wrapped up in introducing like as many characters and subplots as possible, I feel. And then also just points I'll put up on the screen. Catwoman's new outfit was so fucking ugly. It looked so bad. So that gets points taken off. The whole series as a whole gets like 5 stars. I gave the first volume 5 stars. I gave the second volume 4 stars, and I gave the third 3 stars, I think, which is whatever. It wasn't the best thing in the whole world, but altogether, I really enjoyed this take on Batman. If you liked the movie and you are intimidated by the comics, definitely start here. This is where you're gonna find the closest reimagining to the 2022 edition, and I just really liked this series. I had so much fun with it. Also, the best thing about the third volume, if you've read it, the last panel, like, was so good. So good. So, that was Batman Earth 1. Okay, next we also have a fucking hit, which was The Devil Takes You Home by Gavino Iglesias, and it was my first arc of all time. Gavino was so kind to send this to me. I have screamed about this to so many people because I am just so excited about it. I've never gotten an arc, and this was a great way to start that off. I fucking loved this book. I gave it 5 stars, but warning, this book is super fucking dark. It is so fucking dark. I think out of all of the Gabino Iglesias books I've read, this is the hardest one to read, which is saying a lot. It follows a man named Mario, and his daughter has leukemia, and his family is kind of falling apart because of this. He has lost his job for taking too many sick days off, and he like doesn't have any insurance anymore. They don't have a good income, and kind of everything is just fucking falling apart. And so he decides to take a job from like his shady old coworker that kind of changes the course of his life forever. And this book just feels so claustrophobic, and the setting is so hot and sweaty, and it just feels like there is no escape. Like, you are just following Mario as he spirals deeper and deeper into this world of money, drugs, and so much violence. But holy shit, it was just so well done. These characters felt so real. This feels like something that could really happen as the product of the failure of capitalism, insurance, the American health system, and how fucked up it is. Like, this feels like something that could really happen. There's also some supernatural elements in here, like Gabino Iglesias' other work, and I thought those were handled really well. He just has like such a specific little hold on this genre of like really realistic, violent characters, mostly like drug cartels and things like that, like real world horror. But then, like, just when you least expect it, he'll sprinkle in these elements of supernatural horror that are so disturbing and just so well done. And since it is in this hyper-realistic setting, it is just so uniquely disturbing. I read this book while I was at work, and I work at a toy store. And so there were, if you've read this book, there are some scenes that did not match up with that. Like, I should not have been reading this book at work, but I did not want to put it down, so I had to. This book was fantastic. I love Gabino Iglesias, easily one of my favorite authors of all time, and this book was so hyped up for me, and it did not disappoint. I think this releases in August, and I cannot recommend reading this enough. If you have never read Gabino Iglesias, you should fucking start here. It was amazing. Next, I read Through the Woods by Emily Carroll, and I remembered reading this in like 2015 when I was in middle school or high school or whatever, and I loved it. And so when I saw it at my library recently, I had to pick it up. I will put some pictures of the illustrations up because they are just stunning. That is my favorite thing about this book, hands down, is the illustrations. It is just a scary story collection that goes through the woods, and all of the stories are kind of linked a little bit. I don't know. The stories are okay. They felt pretty predictable. They felt like your standard, like, scary stories to tell in the dark fare. It was just such a beautiful reading experience, and the illustrations were just, I can't stress how good they are, how haunting and beautiful and simple, and the way they play with color. Definitely lacking a little bit in the story department, but the illustrations were so stunning that I had no choice but to give this 4 stars. It was a beautiful reading experience. And I would love to read more by Emily Carroll. I know she has some more spooky stuff out. So next I read Batman Year One by Frank Miller, and I liked this book. It wasn't perfect. It didn't super stick with me. Honestly, I don't remember it super well because of all the Batman content and all of the different timelines and universes that I've been interacting with lately. But I really did enjoy this take on the beginning of Batman. It came out in the late 80s, and so I also have to, like, I really respect its contribution to Batman. Like, it is one of the first stories that treated Bruce Wayne and Batman and Gotham in a really, like, realistic manner, so I have to give it a lot of credit for that. However, as mentioned before, I liked Earth One a lot more than this, so I gave it a 3.5. It was good. I had a good time, but it wasn't Batman Earth One. Next, I read Batman Hush, and this was also really enjoyable. I really liked this one, actually. So in this story, somebody knows Batman's identity, and they are targeting him and all of the people he cares about. And in doing this, they are also, like, employing all of the other villains in Gotham and kind of, like, puppeting them to confuse Batman and to target him and other people. And it's just, there's a lot going on in this one. This one is really intense. And as, like, a new Batman reader, some of it could be really confusing, but I was just along for the ride. You get to see, like, kind of the greatest hits of Gotham, like, so many villains in here. So that was really fun. I had a lot of fun, like, getting introduced to all of these characters for the first time with some of them. And every time he thinks he's figured out, like, who this guy is, and every time we think the story is about to, like, slow down and, like, we're gonna figure it out, the rug is fucking ripped out from under us, and then we are just left to try to figure it out again. And that was really fun. It, like, actually did keep me guessing, and I had no idea where it was going to go, so I really enjoyed that. I ended up giving it a 4 out of 5 because it's definitely one of the better Batman comics, in my opinion. It's new, it feels fresh, there's so much going on, and it like keeps you excited the whole time, and there's just so many twists and turns. So I really enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun with this one. I would definitely recommend it. Next, I read Dead Silence by S.A. Barnes, and I was so disappointed in this book. I just don't know why I read it, really. Sci-fi is not my genre. I'm not a sci-fi girl, but I just wanted to check it out because the tagline says the Titanic meets The Shining, and so of course I was into that. If you know me, you know that I love my sea horror, my ocean horror. And so I saw that tagline and I immediately went to check it out, and then I found out it was a sci-fi book. I was like, whatever, like, I'm still gonna look into it. Like, it sounded really interesting. It follows this woman named Claire who is on a spaceship in the middle of space and she's, like, on a beacon repair crew, and, like, just when she thinks that it's about to get shut down and she's going to be out of a job, her and her crew come across this giant ship called the Aurora that vanished 20 years earlier. So it's this big ghost ship. And so that is a really enticing premise, and even though I found out it wasn't about an actual ship on the sea, I was like, okay, that sounds fun, like, we'll check it out. But I was just really bored this whole book. I don't really enjoy sci-fi that much, so all of the space stuff kind of, like, went right over my head. I think I said in my Goodreads review that it was like The Luminous Dead, but straight and boring, and I stand by that. It was boring. The romance was, like, pretty boring and pretty mid. So I don't know, this just like wasn't really a great one for me. I gave it a 2.5. Honestly though, like I think that's kind of just me. I shouldn't have read this book. I knew that it wasn't gonna deliver me what I wanted, and I knew that it wasn't my genre, but I mean, you tell me Titanic meets The Shining, of course I'm gonna fucking read it. They should not have said that on the blurb. Don't trust them. It was nothing like either of those things. Whatever. If you're into sci-fi though, like maybe check this one out, but since I'm not, most of it went over my head and I was just not into it, so whatever, 2.5 stars, let's move on. Next, I read An Elderly Lady Must Not Be Crossed by Helen Thurston, and so this is the sequel to An Elderly Lady Is Up to No Good, and it was fun. It follows Maud as she goes on a vacation to South Africa to kind of get away from the suspicion that is surrounding her after the last book, and it was fine. Like, it just didn't hit the same. We follow her various exploits and what, you know, she's up to no good. She's doing something. But it just didn't hit as hard as the first one. It kind of, I don't really remember it too much. We get some more of Maud's backstory in this, which was interesting. But I kind of just, I don't know. I liked the first one better. I can't really give you that much outside of that. It was fun. Definitely like worth the read if you really liked the first one. But I don't know, kind of forgettable. I gave it a 3 out of 5. Next, I read Foe by Ian Reid, which was actually pretty good. If you know me, if you've seen my top 10 books of all time video, you would see that I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Ian Reid is on there. So I was really hyped for this one. That's the only thing I had read by him up to this point, and I finally decided to give this a chance. And it was really good. I really enjoyed it. Once again, it is like a sci-fi, so it like wasn't super my genre, but I think this was done really well. It follows a man and his wife who live out in the middle of nowhere, and one day they're visited by this mysterious guy that works for the government, and he's like, hey, we are doing a trip into space and we chose you to do that. And he's like, I don't even, what? Like, I don't want to be part of this at all. I don't give a fuck about space. Just let me live out in the middle of nowhere with my wife. And he's like, sorry, random selection process. You don't really have a choice. So it follows him and his wife like through the next few years, where it's like in the beginning, he's just in the very beginning stages of the process. Like he's just being considered. And then like 2 years later, the man comes back and he's like, yeah, you're definitely coming. And he's like, I don't like this. And it just kind of follows them from there. And, you know, I don't want to talk about it too much more because I don't want to give stuff away. But the whole book has this very, like, ominous feeling where the man who's visiting them, like, he's super vague about what's going on. And then eventually you find out when he leaves that he is going to be replaced by, like, this copy of himself. And it is so unnerving and weird. And he's just like, why are you doing this? Just doesn't make any sense. So it's crazy. It's very spooky. I gave it a 4-star because I really enjoyed it, but it wasn't as perfect as I'm Thinking of Ending Things, which is definitely a lot more horror leaning, but Foe was good. It was very eerie and it has that atmosphere of dread just hanging over the whole thing, which Ian Reid is really good at writing. So I would definitely recommend this if you are into more sci-fi stories. It doesn't actually go into space though, which was cool, so I think that is one of the reasons why I could really like stick with it. And if you liked I'm Thinking of Ending Things, this is definitely worth checking out just for more of that Ian Reid writing. Is so good. So yeah, I really liked this one. Next, I read Moomin Comics Volume 1 by Tove Jansson, and this was great. I loved this. I'll put up some of my favorite little strips over there. I had so much fun reading this. It was just wholesome and wonderful. It is a compilation of the Moomin comics that Tove Jansson wrote for adults. And so these definitely go like a little crazier than the like Moomin TV show or the Moomin books. These have like smoking and whiskey and bikinis and crazy fun stuff. And so I really enjoyed that. And it was just so silly. Like, I just had so much fun. I read it all in one sitting, and I showed my girlfriend, like, most of the panels because they were just so funny. And I really enjoyed this. I haven't, like, laughed out loud at a book in a long time, and this definitely did that. and so I gave it a 4 out of 5. I have the second volume as well, so I'm going to check that out soon. But this was just such a joy to read. I love Moomin, it is no surprise, and this was great. Next, I read Ghostland, An American History and Haunted Places, and I really enjoyed this. This was a surprisingly good dark history book. I feel like a lot of times books about like haunted America don't really treat certain issues about America's terrible past with enough delicacy, and I think this one actually did a pretty good job. There were definitely some problems with like language when it came to Native people, just probably could have been looked at a little more, maybe hire like a sensitivity reader. And I think this offered a really well done critical view of American history through ghosts. It kind of follows how these legends generate. It goes through some of like the most famous haunted places in America and kind of debunks some of it, talks about our cultural perceptions of it, talks about what actually happened. And so that was really interesting. A few of my favorite parts were talking about how we treat like Detroit as like a ghost town right now, and talking about the folklore in Detroit that like the people that still live there is very much alive, and just kind of talking about how we right now are choosing to see Detroit as a ghost town and how we see it as something that is a thing of the past when there are still so many people living there. And so that was really interesting, just talking about how like our current idea of a ghost town is being applied to somewhere totally against their will when so many people still live there. I thought that was a really interesting take on that. And I also thought the section on Delphine Lalauerie's mansion in New Orleans was really well done. You might recognize that from American Horror Story. Coven is a big subplot in that. And he just talks about how our cultural perception of this woman as like an evil, terrible slave owner is kind of problematic, because the way we perpetuate it is that there were good slave owners and she was just a bad one. She was extra evil, when really the shit she was doing was like law-appointed punishments for runaway slaves. Like, this wasn't something that never happened. That was something I hadn't really thought about before, and I really enjoyed the way that the author handled that. I thought that was really insightful commentary. So this definitely surprised me. I really enjoyed this book. And my girlfriend is at the window. Do you need me to let you in? Ugh, why would you do that? Get out of here. Get out.
Hi guys, welcome back to my channel.
Go.
Kate keeps reading.
Get out.
I've read 119 books this year.
Get out of here.
And I'm gonna keep going. I love you.
Go. After that, I read Southern Cunning by Erin Oberon, and I really enjoyed this book. I have been slowly making my way through it for a few months, and I finally finished it. And so this is like a nonfiction account of Erin Oberon's experience with Southern folkloric witchcraft, and I am interested in folklore and the South and witchcraft, so this was perfect for me. I loved this personal account into things. One of my favorite parts was when he was talking about biblical witchcraft, which was really popular in the American South and still is in the past like 100 years or so. And that is when witches, a lot of these women don't even call themselves witches, use the Bible as a spell book. And that was really fucking interesting to me, and that was something I had never really heard of before, and really kind of shifted my views of Christianity a little bit, just talking about like Christian witches and, you know, these old like Appalachian women using the Bible as a spell book was so cool and so interesting to me. It's definitely had some signs of independent publishing that were kind of frustrating to read, just like quite a few misspellings, and then some of the chapters got a little repetitive. But I really enjoyed this. I think it just could have taken a little bit of a closer look during editing, but I really liked this. I gave it a 4 out of 5, and I would definitely recommend it if you are interested in Southern folkloric witchcraft. It was a really cool personal look into that. Next, I read Snapdragon by Kat Leigh, and I fucking loved this graphic novel. It was so sweet. I read it all in one sitting, and it follows this girl that befriends her town witch that everybody is so scared of, and turns out to like, she's a big softie, and she's like an old dyke, which was really exciting. That was kind of my favorite part of it, was this lesbian subplot that completely surprised me. And I just loved it. The illustrations were so sweet. I don't want to give too much away about this because it's a pretty short book. It's a graphic novel, but I fucking loved it. This is one of my favorite graphic novels that I've read recently. So I gave it a 5 out of 5. I just love old lesbian witches. Like, what more could you want? Truly, like, what else could you want? Could want out of a graphic novel? Nothing. It was perfect. 5 out of 5. Next. I read another queer graphic novel right after that, and this was called Cheer Up, Love and Pom-Poms, and this was so fucking cute. It's a queer teen romance about a trans girl and then a young lesbian, and they become friends, and they're both cheerleaders, and then they start dating, and it is just like the cutest thing I've ever read in my life. I gave it a 4 out of 5. I don't really have much to say about it, except it was sweet, and it showed just like such a wholesome view of a queer like lesbian relationship, and I really appreciated that because, I don't know, obviously lesbian relationships are sexualized a lot in the media, even teenage ones, and so this was just a wonderful, precious, sweet depiction of a queer relationship, and I loved it. Next, I read Everything Is Teeth by Evie Wilde, and this was so personal to me. It is like a graphic memoir about this woman is like recounting her obsession with sharks when she was little, and how she had like this really strong fear of them, but she was so drawn to them, and then kind of just like depicting that in line with like some childhood trauma and just like some sad, melancholic family experience, that those two things together feels like it was made for me. Like an obsession with sharks and also a traumatic childhood. She's just like me, for real. So I really enjoyed that. I don't really have too much else to say about it. I really liked the art style of this. It was very simple, but then you also have like real pictures of sharks placed in there, so that was really fun. It was really dark at points, which I just really appreciated. I don't think this book is going to be for everybody at all, but since I just had like a really intense personal connection as somebody who's super fucking obsessed with sharks still, and was as a child, it was perfect. If you, too, are obsessed with sharks and had a traumatic childhood, I would definitely recommend this book for you. If you have neither of those things, you probably won't like it as much as I did. I gave it a 4 out of 5. After that, I read Anne of Green Gables, which honestly, I do not have that much to say, because like, what else needs to be said? It was wonderful. It was so sweet. We all know what Anne of Green Gables is about. I'd never read it though, so I really wanted to just finally get around to it, and I really enjoyed it. It was really sweet and wholesome. I listened to a lot of it while I was gardening, which was kind of like the perfect setting for that. And yeah, I don't really have much else to say about it. It was wonderful. If you haven't read it, obviously you should. It's a perfect summer book, and I gave it a 4 out of 5. If you can't tell, I stopped scripting the video like the past few books, so I'm kind of just like winging it for the rest of these. So yeah, sorry the video's slowly declining in quality, but thank you for sticking around and for coming on this journey with me. Next, I read Kim Ji-young, born 1982, which I have had on my TBR for so long, and I'm really glad I finally got around to it. It didn't do exactly what I was expecting. I'm sure you've heard of this book before. It's been really hyped up on BookTube. It follows a woman born in South Korea, and kind of she's given all of the attributes that were most common for women at the time, for women born in 1982. She's meant to be like a stand-in for the everyday woman and how they have faced so much misogyny, and it kind of, you know, just follows her throughout her life as she is beaten down by the misogyny of 80s South Korea and just the world in the 80s in general. But it was really depressing. It was a really important book, I think, but I gave it a 3.5 because I feel like a lot of it felt a little like intro to feminism for me. Like, I don't feel like this really gave me any new ideas or anything revolutionary, kind of like what I thought it was going to be. Something I did really like about it was the footnotes. I love when a book has footnotes, especially when a fiction book like this has footnotes. That was really interesting because it's kind of a blend of fiction and nonfiction and biography almost. And so it has little footnotes at the end, at the bottom of some pages to like give you these facts where it, you know, it shows some misogyny she faces, and then at the bottom it'll be like 40% of women face this exact same thing in South Korea at that time. And so that was really interesting and kind of like brought it home and brought the reality to the reader. So I enjoyed that. I thought that was really smart and made it a lot more like poignant. But a lot of it just felt a little simple to me. Next, I read The Sprite and the Gardener, which was basically a picture book, but oh my god, like one of the sweetest graphic novels I have ever read in my life. Some of my favorite graphic novel illustrations I've ever seen. I'll put some of them up like around my head or something. But oh my god, wonderful. It follows this cute little garden sprite who befriends this gardener and helps her bring her garden back to life. And it's about teamwork and friendship, and that's kind of all you need to know because it is a very short read. If you like these illustrations, just go read the fucking book. I found it at my local library and just sat down and read it in like 20 minutes, and it was wonderful. Could not recommend it more. I gave it a 4 out of 5. It wasn't anything like revolutionary, but the illustrations were so beautiful that you have to check it out. Next, I read a very highly anticipated book for me, and that was Her Body and Other Parties, which is a story collection by Carmen Maria Machado. And I gave this a 4 out of 5. I really enjoyed it. There are a few amazing stories in here. Specifically, the one I'm thinking of is The Husband Stitch. I think everyone needs to read this fucking story. It is amazing. It is a retelling of the Green Ribbon story, which, if you know, you know, changed me forever as a child. I think about that story all the time. I literally want like a tattoo of the illustrations. Anyways, The Husband Stitch was fantastic. It feels like a love letter to urban legends and folklore, and holy shit, wonderful. Some of these were a little forgettable, but all of these felt so disturbing, and I just love Carmen Maria Machado's writing. Like, she fucking gets it. So, I still haven't read In the Dream House. I think I'm going to read that really, really, really soon because I need a really good book right now. But I would definitely recommend this story collection. It was really disturbing though, so like trigger warning, maybe look up the trigger warnings list first because it's intense. It's a lot. Her writing isn't for everyone because it is so bold and brash, and a lot of it is very sexual, so keep that in mind going into it. But I personally really loved this story collection, and overall I gave it a 4 out of 5. Would definitely recommend. Next, I read Mammo by Sas Milledge. And this was so good. This was just a nice little graphic novel. It was so cozy. It is about a hedge witch that has to return to her hometown when her grandmother, Mammo, dies. And she like took care of the town and kind of held it all down. And once she dies, kind of everything starts going to shit. Like everything is just knocked off kilter in this town. And so the hedge witch, Orla, has to return and figure things out. And I'll kind of like leave it from there because once again, it's a short book, it's a graphic novel, so that is like the basic premise. And I really enjoyed this. It was really, really sweet. Some beautiful illustrations, really good queer representation, and a hedge witch is like my shit. I love that. I love these cute little witchy graphic novels that are just popping up everywhere, and so many of them are queer. So definitely check this out. It was really wholesome. I'll put some of the illustrations up to sell you. And I think there might be more volumes of this. This collected volumes 1 through 5 and like a compendium. I'm hoping there's going to be more of this because I will definitely be there to read it. It was so wholesome and so wonderful, and I could not recommend it enough. Okay, finally, we are at the very end. Thank you for coming along on this big journey with me. The last book I read was We Keep the Dead Close by Becky Cooper. And I don't really know what I was thinking going into a true crime book. true crime is not for me. Used to be really into true crime, and since then I've developed a lot of like ethical issues with it that I just don't even really know if it can be handled properly. I think this did an okay job though. I gave it a 3.5. This follows a woman who was murdered at Harvard in the 60s and kind of how it was covered up and no one ever talked about it again. And supposedly a professor murdered her and the professor is still there. And it's very intense. Like, it is very intense, and it kind of talks about how we like mythologize murders and the problems with that and how it affects real people, obviously. And so I think Becky Cooper did a good job because she talked to the family of this girl a lot and she like got their blessing with everything. But it's still hard for me to read a true crime story without coming away just feeling kind of icky about it, like just feeling like it was a little unethical. So I gave it a 3.5. I think it was handled well, but it's still just not really my genre anymore, and I think I need to accept that and move on from true crime. But I think if you are interested in true crime, this was definitely a good read. It's so popular for a reason. Okay, so that is everything I read this month. Sorry for the kind of long, kind of unorganized video, but I still hope you enjoyed. I have a new video coming out soon as well that is going to be summer horror recommendations, so get excited for that. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked this video, leave me a like, and if you want to see more of me and hear me talk about more books, feel free to subscribe. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you have a wonderful day, and yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video.